security number. Some people breathe less than other people, right? You take more breaths in a day.
How many breaths
Are we
have
really
you
gonna
ever taken?
are we really gonna have a year for that? Are we now
I don't know if we can never breathe and be considered alive.
Really? Do you know that for sure?
I mean, I guess not.
There's animals that haven't breathed air that are alive, fish and stuff. They use their gills to pull oxygen out of the water.
That's still breathing.
I don't know. I don't know if that sounds more like juicing to me.
Juicing. You're juicing the water.
You're juicing juice.
Is water wet?
It was funny when my wife introduced me to Crazy Joe. She sent me a picture of him, and I go, who the heck is that guy? It was the monocle that did it for me.
You didn't bring. Well, in the first place, you didn't bring that stuff. Well, you didn't see him.
No, Crazy Joe's in the makerspace.
No, I see the group chat, but I don't see his monocle. You say he had a monocle?
Yeah, zoom in on him.
Yeah. Okay.
He looks crazy. That's why his name is Crazy Joe Loco. This guy's got. He's way out there. Okay, so let's finish up our ArrayAdapter discussion. So last time we were talking about the inheritance model, right? So kind of closing some gaps in preparation for next semester. And I assume everybody who wasn't already registered for 300 is now registered for 300?
Yes.
All right. Make sure you are in that class because it's it's probably in terms of the programming classes, the most important of the 3 programming classes. It brings so many things together, and I think that's where you turn into like a true computer scientist, where you're really wielding the weapon. All right. So we talked about how everything comes from this object-based class. We saw through the documentation that an array adapter actually is this thing called a base adapter, but that guy's an abstract class. Remind me, what does it mean for something to be an abstract class? I think you read about it in the homework too, right? What does it mean for something to be an abstract class? Go ahead.
It can't be instantiated, but it dictates what essentially we build.
Okay, so we can't actually make one of those guys. Can't actually create an instance of something that's an abstract class. So they mostly exist as a starting point implementation to support inheritance, right? So the example we used last class was, we have this idea in real life of an abstract class called human, right? But if we walk through the halls, we're not going to see any generic humans out there. We're not able to create instances of humans. Instead, we create instances of more specialized versions of humans, right? So those are the non-abstract classes, where human is the abstract class that we used, since our more specialized humans still share a whole lot of commonalities. We just can't, those specializations are required. All right. But then we saw our default array adapter, and we've already used this guy for creating our lists of things. And we see that our array adapters, the generic one, is capable of dealing with a list of strings and filling in a text view. And if that's all we need to do, if we're just doing a list of flat things, which is probably going to be a relatively common thing, right? Several apps, you're just giving here's a list of invoices or a list of something else. You probably can get away with just a string often. But every now and then you need to do something special. You need a specialized version of that default array adapter. Now, you still want him to be an array adapter. He needs to still do the normal array adapter-y things. We just need to update his knowledge for a couple of those things so that he can do something a little bit more specialized. Make some sense? All right, so we started writing the code last time. So we named it employee adapter. It doesn't have to have the word adapter in or anything. We could have named this, I probably used the example elephant last time. You can name your class whatever you want, but usually you want to name variables and class names something meaningful so we know what they're for. This is an adapter for employees, therefore employee adapter makes some sense. right? Also, we started it with a capital letter because typically class names start with a capital letter. Naming convention. All right, and we said this guy extends. We have this keyword called extends. This is how the inheritance model is implemented in Java. We say extends this class. So we start off with a base class of ArrayAdapter, and we make EmployeeAdapter extend that guy to be something a little more. Okay? And then we went into the documentation for ArrayAdapter, and we saw that there is a version of ArrayAdapter that we like to use that takes in 3 parameters: a context, the unique identifier for your layout resource. What does your row look like? All right, that's what that guy is. And then your list of stuff. In our case, we're taking in a list of employees. The only reason we're even writing this dude is so that we can have a specialized version of an ArrayAdapter that knows how to handle employees. All right, make some sense? Okay, now, what's that guy do right there?
Oh, the super keyword.
Who is super? And what does that line specifically do? And why does it need to be first inside my constructor? That sounds like a really good exam question. Go ahead.
Isn't this how an object refers to an instance of its parent within itself?
Yep. Okay, it's how an object refers to its parent, the instance of its parent from within itself. That's what super is. Now, this particular line here, what's that guy actually doing? This is a very special use of the keyword super. That has to be the very first line of our constructor, if I intend to use it. And in this case, we have to use it.
Is that referring to the other stuff that's within the other classes?
What kind of thing do you, so forget about the word super for a second. What kind of thing does this look like to you? Because of all the parentheses and stuff like that, what does that look like? Looks like a method-y thing, right? And the things that are in Java that we know that look kind of like methods are constructors and methods, right? Those are our method-y things. Okay, so we know this guy isn't a field, he's one of the other 2 guys. All right, now, this dude here, does he look like a method-y thing? Yeah. Based on what I highlighted there, he looks like a method-y thing, right?
Oh, that's...
But is he a method or is he a constructor, and how do you know? Is that guy a method or is he a constructor? He's a constructor. How do we know he's a constructor?
It is the same name.
Identical name to the class, and what else? Somebody else. We got 2 hands so far, and I know both of them know the answer. So, match is the name of the class. What else? What else is our evidence here that this guy must be a constructor and not a plain Jane method? You should know this, Clancy. You don't even know the question I asked, do you?
How do I know it's a constructor, not a plain Jane
Method.
method?
Yeah.
Well, it's probably because it doesn't have a new keyword.
Okay, good, bad answer. New keyword we'd only see when we're calling constructors in the wild. This is where we're defining it. So constructors would always have the new keyword before it. And actually the correct answer here is related to that. It's just the other side. Why do we always use the new what is the new keyword? Remind me of that.
Creates an object.
Well, yeah, so
Creates an
well,
object within that class. Or
but specifically
Memory address.
memory address. Real estate agent creates a memory address, right? So new keyword, his job is to go get a pointer. Go get a memory address for us. Now, new keywords are always used in conjunction with us calling a constructor. Why is that? What kind of value does a constructor always return?
the memory address.
Memory address. Okay? So, this guy looks methody, but we know that he is a constructor because A, his name matches the name of the class and what's missing right here.
Oh, there's no class.
What goes there?
Static?
Void.
Yeah, this is kind of sucking pretty bad.
Public.
What goes there when we have methods?
Return type.
Return type. All right, so this dude doesn't have a return type. Okay, why doesn't he have a return type? Because he always, oh, go ahead.
Well, because if he doesn't have a return type, because he's running through a program instead of.
What kind of value does a constructor always return? Memory address. Always returns a memory address. So why don't constructors have a return type?
Because it's strictly there for memory address sake. That if you're to return anything else, it would be a memory address. You get a string and
It's kind of a waste of time.
yeah.
If you have something that always returns a memory address, it's kind of a waste of us as the humans' time to write the word there. Not that Java has a word for memory address, but to write a word there that would always be the same word. It's inefficient. Let us write nothing because the thing we would write there would always be identical. Okay? I'm kind of remembering, did we say something about Swift in here last time?
No.
So kind of an interesting other side to this. So Java, when you are, so this is going off of kind of Clancy's new keyword thing. So Java says, you know what? Since a constructor always returns a memory address, we won't make you tell us what it returns because we know what it always returns. But what's interesting, and I'm just going to, I'll put the code in here, even though it's not really an appropriate place to put it, but just roll with me on this. So if I create an employee adapter, well, actually, let's do it with like an object. So I say object O is equal to new object. If we were to look at the class object, we would see public object, do stuff, whatever. All right, so this would be the constructor for object because it matches the class name, right? It has no return type because we've decided it's a waste of time to have a return type since constructors always return memory addresses, right? Now, so this is where the constructor is being defined. This is where the constructor is being used. Do I ever have anything before a constructor other than the new keyword? So why do we have to type the new keyword? Why did Java only get us halfway home? They said, hey, you don't have to tell us about the return type, but we want you to still write the new keyword. Just so you remember who's boss. Isn't that kind of dumb? So if we were writing this same line in a newer language like Swift, we would say object O is equal to, and you've seen this in Python as well, is equal to object. The new keyword is omitted because it would always be there. That makes sense? So if we're going down this path of always, kind of reducing the amount of redundancy the human being has to type. Because look, why type new if that's always what you would type there? The computer can just assume that, right? So newer languages remove some of those things. Eventually we end up going overboard, right? We start removing everything. Because, I think I've joked before, at least probably in some class you've had me for with Swift allowing you to use emojis for variable names. That is ridiculous. Because, emojis, there's interpretation involved, right? So if one of our goals is to have variables that are unambiguous and they're meaningful to what they're storing, and all of a sudden you're storing something inside of some weird emoji that has 9 different meanings, 3 of them are inappropriate, right? Somebody looks at your code, they're giggling. Somebody else looks at your code and they're just confused. Emojis aren't appropriate for variable names. Doesn't make sense, right? But at some point, we're probably going to have standardized meaning for emojis, which is kind of funny because then we go full circle, we're right back to hieroglyphics, We're just have full color hieroglyphics. All right. Because we really are already becoming a society of less and less direct communication, right? We're moving more towards email and text and Snapchats and stuff like that, right? The old adage, picture says a million or 1,000 words or something like that. That would imply that 100 pictures says a lot more words. So we just stream emojis next to each other. You ever had somebody send you a message of emojis and you're too embarrassed to ask what it means? You're just like, okay, apparently I'm supposed to know this. You're trying to figure it out. All right, so this very first line here is us making a call to our parent's constructor because we are building ourselves in terms of our parent. We are starting off as a instance of our parent and then further differentiating ourselves. And this line always has to be the very first thing we have inside of our constructor. Now, if I don't put that in there, if I leave that off, there is an invisible line here that's presumed to be there. Anybody know what it is? If I don't specifically make a call to my parent's constructor, a call will be made for me. What would that call look like if I were to write it? Go ahead. Well, it would be to object if we were inside of the class-based adapter. But if we're in the class employee adapter, our parent is ArrayAdapter. But it would always be the same thing, the same line. It's that line right there. There is a call to our parent called super that takes no parameters. This allows us to build an instance of our parent. Okay. Now this guy right now is showing an error. Why is he showing an error? In this particular case, who is super? Super is an instance of ArrayAdapter. Correct? And if we go and look at ArrayAdapters, and we look at his constructors, this guy takes 2 parameters, 3, blah, blah, blah. We have 0 constructors that take 0 parameters. Make sense? So me trying to call upon one of ArrayAdapter's parents, or ArrayAdapter's constructors, passing it no inputs results in a not found constructor. So if I don't put anything here, Java's not happy with me. If I highlight over this, it's going to tell me that there is no argument constructor. There is no default constructor available in ArrayAdapter. Default constructor being a generic name for a constructor that takes no parameters. Because ArrayAdapters require some things to be built. Now, every single object is built in terms of a parent. This guy's parent is ArrayAdapter. We must create that instance of our parent. So we're going to pick one of our parent's constructors, in this case one that takes a context, an int, and a collection of objects. And we're going to call upon that guy here first to establish ourselves as a starting point ArrayAdapter, and then further differentiate ourselves. Okay? So at this point forward, this is a instance of employee adapter. And let's see, do we have a... Yeah, that'll work. All right, so we have this thing called that's taking in a list of objects, and we're setting our parent to it. Now, for my array adapter, I don't need to set anything else here because it's still a plain Jane array adapter. But there is a row, or there is a thing. So if I want to say get, is it get item? Oh, here, I'll just go into this guy. We have to override a class, or an instance rather, getView. Okay? So what getView does is he returns for you the view, in the default case, the text view that has your string for that particular position filled in. But we need to write a more interesting version of this because we're no longer going to fill in just a text view. So I'm going to start typing down here. I'm going to say getView, this guy right here. And I'm going to press enter, and it's going to go ahead and override that for me. Now, this override thing is actually not required, but it does speed up the compilation because I am overriding a method that I would have otherwise received from my parent. That make sense?
You can't override you can technically change methods of the parent. It's just that you'd have to override them.
Correct. We can't modify our parent's method directly. We have to write our own version of it that would be found more locally.
Does that affect the other parent method?
Does that affect the other parent method?
If you were to call that right now, would that use the method that you just gave it?
Well, as it's written right now, and it still calls the parent's version.
Oh,
Yeah. So as it's written right now, it's just a fancy way of calling the parent's version of this method. But we're going to take that out, right? Ultimately, what are we doing? We are returning a view. That's our job here, is to return a view. And in Android, a view is something that we see. All right? So a view is going to be our filled in row. So in our generic case that we've done with so far where we show strings, a view would be a text view. Right? That's the text view that we would find from this particular view. But I'm going to find a different view here. All right? So we're going to pause this for a second. I don't remember if we've created our layout yet. I'm going to go into my resources. And we're going to go into layout. And I'm going to create a new layout. And this guy is going to be a layout for a single row of my employee. And we'll keep it fairly simple for time. So I'm going to say new, and I want a layout resource file. All right, and we're going to call this guy an employee underscore row. That's just what we're going to name them. All right. And we'll go ahead and leave it as linear layout. And I'll just hit OK. And it's going to look like a whole screen for a minute here. Now, this guy is a vertical linear layout by default. Here's my orientation. And that's the way I like to start with things anyways, right? But in this case, I want to actually have two things in my row. So I'm going to go ahead and put a horizontal linear layout. Actually, you know what? We'll keep it as a vertical linear layout. So I'm going to go ahead and put, two text views in here. I'll go ahead and change the font on this guy to make it 24 maybe. Okay. And yeah, that'll be good enough. Then I'll copy him. I'm going to name this first one fname TV. I'm going to name the second one LName TV. I'll change the text in these just to remind us of what those are going to be. All right, so now what my row looks like is 2 text views vertically stacked. All right, and our layout height for this guy we're going to have set as wrap content. That make sense? And then we're going to name this guy here our employee row view group, VG. All right. So now in our code, and we'll do this in our main activity just as a, actually we'll do this in our list activity just as a example. All right, so I'm building something from my collection of things that I've stored inside of core. So core has a array list of employees, right? That's what we stored inside of core. We have an array list of employees. And at this point, using a generic array adapter, we've had to turn all those guys into strings by just grabbing their first and last name and concatenating them together. But now, what if I want to build an employee adapter? So I'll go ahead and highlight that. I'll put it above it. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to create an employee adapter. EA is equal to a new, Freudian, employee adapter, passing it a context, this. Then I have to pass it a resource. That's going to be r.layout.employee row. Okay, that's my resource for this row. Not that android.r. Simple layout row or whatever it was called. I have a custom layout row that I just built. r.layout.employee row. And then I'm going to pass it my collection, the employees. Make sense? So I'm building a specialized array adapter called an employee adapter. And then I'm going to say this dot employee list view dot set adapter to EA. Because I don't need to do this special stuff anymore of converting it to a string. Because I have a specialized version of my array adapter called employee adapter. I haven't necessarily made him special yet, but he is going to be a specialized version. So this is all the code I'm going to need here to show a list of employees. But now I need to go train my employee adapter to know how to deal with this. All right. So we'll go into our employee adapter. Down here, this guy's job is to return the filled in view for this row. Let's call it for row position. Because notice this guy gets passed in the bucket number. All right, so what we're going to do in here is we're going to go ahead and say employee cur employee is equal to this dot get item from position. And we know this guy is going to be an employee. All right, so this will give us a item that lives at position in the collection that this adapter was built in terms of. So we built this adapter in terms of this objects collection. You know what, I think I can say this. I think I can say I want this guy to be a ArrayAdapter of employee. Not let me get away with it. Nope. The cookie crumbles. All right, so we've built this guy in terms of this list of objects, this list of employees. Now I'm going to go ahead and given the position that was passed into getView, and that automatically gets called. We're not the ones calling getView. The list view calls getView. He says, give me the view for position 0. Give me the view for position 1. Give me the view for position 7. He's asking for each individual row so he can put it inside of that list view. Make sense? Go ahead.
Can you explain a little more in depth what line 28 is doing? Like, I'm confused why we have employee in parentheses.
Yeah.
Or, and you said, like, getView isn't being called, then what is this doing?
Yeah, so here, I'll show you this. Let me show you an alternative way of doing that. We'll talk about so when I call my parents' version of the constructor here, I'm passing my collection into this black box. I don't know what ArrayAdapter has named that, that collection. He's given me access to elements in that collection through a method called getItem. I can say, hey, can you give me whatever lives at bucket 3 in the collection I gave you earlier? I can't directly access that collection because it was defined as a private field. All right. Now, let's say that I'm like, look, I'm going to bypass your crap. Right? I don't want to deal with whatever you did. Well, then I can come in here and I can say, you know what? 2 can play this game. So I'm going to create a private array list of employees called my objects. And then in here, look, I'll go ahead. I still have to pass the parent the objects. You do with it whatever you're going to do with it. I don't care. Not my problem. And then I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to use my more local version of this and say this dot my objects is equal to objects. Now if I do that, I can now say employee cur employee 2 is equal to this dot my objects dot get position. So this says, give me the employee. So remember, the employee we're getting here is the employee that lives at position inside of our collection that we intend to use his data to fill in that row, the view for that row. So I can either indirectly get my employee by asking, I didn't write a method in here called getItem, did I? So getItem here is something that I inherited from my parent. And I don't know how he does it, but I know if I ask him for an item at bucket 3, he will give me the item from bucket 3 that he was built in terms of.
So do those 3 lines you wrote accomplish what that one line did then?
Almost. You mean this line right here plus this line plus this line?
Yeah.
Almost. Because now what we've done, it'll actually still work, but it'll accidentally work, is there's another method called, I think it's called getSize, that returns the number, or maybe it's called getCount, the number of elements in your collection. It's entirely possible that I'm saying, look, you can't have my data. So here's a new array list with nothing in it. Deal. So I can pass the parent an empty list and say, look, I'm going to handle the list from this point forward. You don't get access to my data. If that's the case right now, this method called getCount would return 0. There are 0 elements in this collection. So if I'm going to choose to manage my own array list, manage my collection, I will then need to go in here and write getCount myself and have this guy return this dot myObjects.size. So he returns the right value. Does that make sense? I can choose either way. I can play the game and say, look, for some reason the ArrayAdapter didn't give me direct access to my collection. That's okay. He wanted to keep that variable private. He gave me accessor methods. He gave me a getter called, what's it called? Get item. He gave me a getter where I just tell him what bucket I want and he'll give me what's at that bucket. But because he's storing my collection as a generic collection of objects, I have to, you know what's interesting? I think I can still hack this. I think I can pull this off. Oh. Very disappointed. I suspect there's a way to do it. Tell ArrayAdapter to actually build himself in terms of employees instead of generic objects, but whatever. Let's assume we can't for right now. There's got to be a way of doing it, or that's just a poor design. But in any case, since I'm passing a collection in here, an ArrayAdapter, my parent, doesn't know what kind of collections I might pass him, so he's not implemented in terms of employees. He had to write his collection in terms of objects because we know that all objects come from object at some level. So when I ask him for one of his items, he's going to give it to me as an object. I happen to know in this case it's actually an employee. So I'll turn him into an employee and store him in my variable here. Does that make sense? So I would say the correct way of doing this is to say, look, we're not going to create our own array list. We should use as much of our parent as we can. Therefore, I don't have to set a local copy. But I probably should give my parent the actual data instead of an empty list and just say, you know, stick your tongue out at him or whatever. Whatever is the appropriate disrespectful gesture. Probably something emoji based anymore, right? Okay. All right, so I'm going to pass it my collection. My parent's going to do with that collection whatever he does with them. ArrayAdapters already adapt stuff. They already manage the collection. I don't have to do that. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. So now when I'm done, now I also won't have to override this because now the it already matched it for me. That's another good example where, we keep wanting languages to do more and more stuff for us. Don't you hate when you want to make something a string? And in some languages, what does Atom do? You put an opening double quote, it gives you the closing double quote, but you only wanted one double quote. But you can't delete the first one because that'll delete the second one. You have to delete the second one to leave yourself with the first one. Gonna play their dirty little game. They try to do us a favor. And see, programmers, we're a finicky bunch, right? I just got this new laptop, and I tell you last time what the best feature of this new laptop is? Physical escape key. What? It was on the multimedia bar.
Why?
That's what Apple was all about, these multimedia bars, and they're like, hey, I guess I should be thankful they didn't put the whole keyboard on there. Yeah, so he has a multimedia escape key, right?
Yeah.
Plus, if I was Apple, I would just start screwing with people. Just move the escape key just enough pixels to you don't hit it dead center. Or shift it to the middle.
Start off because You'd be like, oh, what can I do? What can I
Like
do to
half
make
of it
this
doesn't
even
work.
work?
And the rest of it doesn't work.
Well, it does work. You just have to hit it dead center because it's a digital button. It's just like when you're typing on your phone and with the software keyboard and you hit it 1 pixel off or something like that. Yeah. But now I have. I mean, it's on the same line. I have that same multimedia bar. Just the oh, and also your fingerprint sensor is part of your multimedia bar too, right?
Yep.
I have a physical fingerprint sensor button.
Well,
See, totally awesome. So all that money for, I didn't really care about the fingerprint button, but for an escape key. That's how Apple gets you.
well, they got you.
Well, and they bragged about how the keyboard is supposed to be more clicky or something like that. I don't know, I didn't have a problem with the previous keyboard.
Like, I love this keyboard. You can just like
Yeah,
slide
I
across
can't-
it. Like, you have to like pick it up. It's like,
I type on so many different things. I can touch type, which does that mean make sense? I can text on my phone without looking at my phone.
I can do that.
yeah, I can do it.
Yeah. Right, but I mean, I'm so used to typing on my different devices that.
That's what I do in class sometimes. Like,
Oh, so the teacher doesn't know?
like the teacher back in high school would be like, you can't have your phone inside, read the text. And
Yeah, here's
like,
Chris just like.
do it.
Yeah.
And look, make sure. And
Yeah.
oh.
Yeah, well, that was the biggest complaint that people had with Apple's Face ID, right? You know, you can no longer be inconspicuous. Now you got to look at your phone to get the thing to unlock before you can start, texting, privately. All right. So I no longer need to store my own collection because ArrayAdapter is going to store it for me. I no longer need to now set that guy. I should probably pass my real collection that I want ArrayAdapter to manage for me into my parent's constructor. And then down here inside of getView, I don't need this guy because I'm just going to ask my parent effectively. So I could actually say super dot there. So here, this is a fun question. We'll call this current employee 2. What's the difference between those two lines?
That's a good question.
Those two guys. Remind me, who's this? Who's the this
Something that
keyword?
refers to an
Yep.
object refers to-
This is how an object refers to itself from within itself. What's super?
An object refers to.
Yeah, how an object refers to an instance of its parent from within itself. So in this case, I'm saying I want to call my getItem method. In this case, I'm saying I want to call my parent's getItem method.
Oh.
But they both are doing the exact same thing. What is this guy doing? He is looking locally for a method called getItem. Did we write a method in here called getItem? Nope. But if we run out of places to look, nope. We look to our parent and say, hey, do you have a getItem method? So this guy says, I'm going to look locally first. Then when I don't find it, I'll automatically ask my parent. This guy says, look, I know I'm not going to find it locally. Let's just talk to the parent. It also lets you bypass. I could have written my own getItem locally and then bypassed it artificially by saying, parent, I want your version of getItem. I don't want to go to my version of getItem. I'm not sure if that would make that much sense, but you have the ability to do that. Go ahead.
Is using the super version much more efficient, or is it pretty much effective?
On paper, it seems like it would probably be more efficient, but under the hood, they've probably created some efficiencies where when it's actually compiled, all the methods become local methods or something like that. So I probably wouldn't, you would probably rarely see it written this way.
It's super though. How could it not be better?
I guess that's true. But again, this is I guess the official answer is I don't know. On realistically, this should be faster. Realistically, super dot should be faster because I'm telling it exactly where he can find it. So I can probably comfortably say it's not slower. But depending on how they've implemented their compiler and how they bring the parents' methods in, it is possible that it doesn't make a difference. But since I am able to distinguish between two methods, a local method and a global method, my method of my parent that have the same name, like I'm allowed to write my own local version of getItem, and I have not destroyed my parent's version. I've just differentiated myself from my parent's version. So if that's the case, saying this.getItem would then look locally, and super.getItem would avoid looking locally and just immediately jump to the parent. So with that in mind, it probably is faster to say super dot, which is interesting because you would rarely see that. You would rarely see somebody write the line like this. You'd almost always see them write it with this dot. Go ahead.
So is this referring to getView, and what would super be referring to?
Is this referring to getView? What do you mean?
So we're referring to our.
Oh, who is this here?
Who are we?
Oh, this is the instance of ArrayAdapter. It's an instance of a class, not a method. Yeah, so getView is a method name. Yeah, so this is our local instance of ArrayAdapter. Super is our local instance of ArrayAdapter. That makes sense? All right, so one way or another, we get our employee that we want to set here. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say view group. I'll just call it my row is equal to the view group version of ConvertView. All right, so ConvertView is coming in as a generic view. I happen to know it's a vertical linear layout, which is a view group. All right, that's the kind of animal it is. And then I'll go ahead and say text view fname TV is equal to my row dot find view by ID. Before we used to ask activities to find view by IDs. And what did the activity do? He looked at his own content view. And he actually called his content views find view by ID. So I'm asking my row to find view by ID r.id.fname TV. Similarly, text view lname TV is equal to my row dot find view by ID r.id.lname TV. Then I'll say fname TV dot set text to current employee 2 dot get fname. lname TV dot set text to cur employee 2 dot get lname. And then ultimately I will return my row. That's what that guy does. So getView, his job is to fill in whatever kind of animal this guy is with the data found at position inside of our collection. So I went ahead and grabbed the employee from position. I know how I designed my row. So I know the top level component of my row is a view group. He was a vertical linear layout. And I know, so I went ahead and just typecasted my convert view to that view group. Then I asked that view group to get me the 2 text views that I also know I defined in there. Just as a reminder, here's one text view, fname TV. Here's my other text view, lname TV. So I asked my view group, which is this guy. This is the guy that came in as our, what was it called? Convert view. I asked him to find fname TV within himself and lname TV within himself. And then I set those two text views equal to the current employee's first and last name. So I just filled out my form, right? Give me my row, give me the two text views for my row, and I'll set those text views to the first name of the current employee and the last name of the current employee. And then what was the purpose of this method getView? It was for me to hand you my filled in view. So that's what I did. I returned it right here. Now I've made a specialized version of an array adapter called employee adapter. This guy knows how to deal with a collection of employees rather than a collection of strings. That make sense? All right. Questions about that? You see how we took a base class that does what we want it to do, but just doesn't quite give us the customizability that we want to have for making fancier rows, right? And with just a little bit of finagling, we can create a version of this class that lets us have that. There is an alternative you can do to this that you will often see. I don't particularly like it, but given that really all we did here was write this one method. That's what we did, isn't it? If I go into my employee list activity, another thing we can do is we can say ArrayAdapter of type employee, call this guy adapter, is equal to a new ArrayAdapter of type employee. And we pass this guy our context, our layout. Here, I'm actually just going to steal the stuff from up here. All right, so instead of building a generic employee adapter or a specific employee adapter, I'm building a generic array adapter, passing it my exact stuff, right? But I don't put a semicolon yet. Instead, I put an opening curly brace, and then I say getView in here, and I can actually write that code to override it in there inline. So I would go in here, and I'll just steal my jazz. And you'll actually see something a little bit interesting in here. Is I think I won't need that there now. I won't need to typecast it because I built this array adapter in terms of employees. Remember the thing I said that there's got to be a way of doing this earlier? So now I'm asking this particular array adapter to get me an item. And if I say this dot get item, notice he returns an employee now. Because this array adapter, which this is, was built in terms of employees. But I'm still doing the same stuff. I've just said, look, you are an array adapter, but, and this is to your point, I want to change my parent's version of getView slightly. So rather than creating a brand new class, I'm going to use the existing class with a tweak. All right? Then I put that semicolon there. And now I can use adapter here instead. That make sense? Choose your poison. For something like this, I might say it's a coin flip because we're not doing anything crazy inside of getView. Typically, I prefer to have more organized code and move things into a class and then just call the class from within here. rather than having some very customized stuff, especially if I'm going to use this in more than one place. Right? If this is the only place I'm ever going to use it, and you want to have your inline stuff because you think it makes you look smarter, fine. All right, makes sense, the difference between these two? One's not necessarily better and worse than the other one. In this case, I'm creating a generic array adapter. Well, less than a I'm creating an array adapter and telling him you're actually an array adapter of employees. I didn't have to do that. I could have left employee off. If I didn't do this, that's not the end of the world. I just would now have to typecast get item to employee. He won't automatically come out as an employee for me because he was built generically in terms of collections of objects, since everything is an object. All right, so this is a normal array adapter, but I said, you know what? I do want to make a tweak. So before I put my semicolon here, I'm going to tweak one of your methods. I'll override one of those methods in line here. And now I actually have a normal array adapter that's somewhat evolved. But he's still an array adapter. He's not an employee adapter. He just functions like my employee adapter would have functioned. All right? You can decide which of these guys you like. I rarely will write it like this. But if I'm in a rush and I don't want to create another class and it's just something tiny like this, I'll write it this way. It's not the end of the world.
Is that directly changing the array adapter method, or is that like behind the scenes making a subclass?
Probably neither. I think it's not changing array adapter. It's not making a class behind the scenes. It's giving us this one instance that has an update. Whereas if I created another array adapter 5 lines later, and I didn't make this change, he would have the default getView of ArrayAdapter. So I am not modifying ArrayAdapter. Just for this one variable, I have a tweaked instance of ArrayAdapter without having to create another class. Now, having said that, is the way that's implemented from a language perspective creating some sort of temp class? Possibly. Yeah, we don't necessarily know what's happening under the hood. You know, it's how they actually pull that off. Could be one of 20 different ways, something like that. But you're certainly not having, it doesn't have side effect. What you do here will not impact array adapters this point forward in your code. If you want another array adapter that works the same way as this guy, yeah, you're going to want to go ahead and do this again, or probably pull it into your own class so you only have to do it once. Go ahead.
You use the term typecasting. Why are we typecasting ConvertView? What would it automatically get if we didn't typecast view group?
Yeah, so a view, generically speaking, is anything that you see on the screen. So for instance, a text view is a view. A view group is also a view. So this is kind of like the object. It's kind of like object. Object is to classes as view is to things you see in your interface. So view is the most generic thing that you can see in your interface. So the getView method takes in a view, and we're saying, I just designed that row. I happen to know that row is not a generic view. In fact, really, a row would never be a generic view, right? It's always going to be at least a text view. But in this case, I know, you know what? He is actually a view group, which is what a vertical linear layout is. Under the hood, a vertical linear layout is implemented as a view group. So I'll just go ahead and for convenience purposes, I'll change ConvertView into a view group because that is what he actually is. But that allows me now from this point forward to use him as if he was a view group. Realistically, I probably didn't even need to do it. I could have just used ConvertView because he has the ability to find a view by ID. I believe ConvertView dot find view by ID. Yeah, I didn't even have to do it. All right. Any other questions about that stuff? All right. Now, I'm not going to test you over this. I'm kind of teeing you up for next semester. But I won't test you about ArrayAdapter stuff. But there is a lot of stuff we've talked about in the last 2 classes that is really, really important that would be fair game, like the this and the super, calling your parents constructors, that relationship between a class and parent classes, and at the very top of that being object. Okay, these are things that have nothing to do with Android, have nothing to do with array adapters. These are object-oriented programming concepts. Make sense? Things like that would be fair game. But which method to override for array adapters, not important. And I would even take that a step further. Another important thing that and we'll go through the slides here to talk about what I think is important for the exam. But if I'm going to give you kind of a generalistic heads up, I'm not going to test you over Android stuff. Okay, this course, we've used Android for some time to add a little spice to our interfaces and make us feel like we're solving some interesting problems, not always dealing with text-based, but I always want to fall back on this idea that programming is programming, right? The stuff we've done in the last several weeks, we could have done in iOS, didn't matter. We could have done it with web development, doesn't matter. So the exam is about the concepts you were to have learned in 250 from an object-oriented, more advanced, call it an intermediate programming class, not an Android thing. Make some sense? All right, so the exam will be cumulative in that it is fair game for me to ask you about stuff that was earlier in the semester. I am going to make the exam online. Now, one thing I'm going to do, the exam, okay, what time is our exam supposed to be? Is it 10:10 Tuesday?
Yep.
Okay. So the exam is supposed to be 10:10 on Tuesday. I need the exam submitted by, let's call it 5 p.m. Friday. You can decide when you want to take it. I am not going to put a time limit on the exam. Now, that doesn't give you free rein to go and Google everything. So I want to know what you know. If you need to quickly look up some term because you're having a brain fart, do it. If you think it's cheating, don't do it. If it doesn't feel like cheating and you're just giving me your best shot, that's fine. Look something up real quick. Not putting a time limit on it, but I will make a point to be here on campus and available at 10:10 a.m. on Tuesday. So if you choose to take it during that time and you think you might run into questions or something like that, I'll either be in my office or down in the makerspace. One of the two, and you can, I'll also have Slack open, so you can certainly ask me questions or whatever. All right. Good chance I'll have Slack open if you're taking it at other times as well, but no promises that I'll be able to respond in the real-time response time that you might need while you're in the middle of taking the exam, because you will still have to do the entire thing in one sitting. If you want to take 12 hours, you can. I don't care. I would not encourage you to do that, but you got to do it in one sitting. All right, questions about the format of the exam? Okay, it is going to be cumulative. I would go through the slides here and just look at the things that were on the midterm, compare it to the things that you think I have drilled since the midterm. I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at that midterm exam, and I'm going to see what things were often missed. Okay, if there's some concept you've heard me yell at you about since the midterm, I would say it's probably a decent chance that's going to make it onto the final again, so I can yell at you again next semester, okay? But don't miss it again, all right? But certainly focus on programming concepts, not Android stuff. Okay, I'm not going to throw you some weird Android curveball. It's possible I might give you some code that is based off of an Android on Create or something like that, but I wouldn't ask you details about like what does set content view do inside of on Create. It's possible, here's a good example of something I don't think I would ask you about. I wouldn't ask you about the activity lifecycle. We've talked about it. It's kind of interesting when you come back to a screen with on resume. Those are all interesting things, but it's very Android specific. Whereas I would ask you possibly about singletons, having that global class that's available across, in our case, how we practice it was across all activities, but that applies to any sort of software development. It could be across all screens in a .NET application. It could be across, all pages in a web application, things like that. Make sense? So as you're studying, focus on programming concepts, not Android crap. Go ahead.
So to clarify about singletons, those are available across, like, you were using like screens and pages rather than classes?
Classes is also accurate. Yeah. Anything that lives in the package that you're in, which for us is the directory, it's available too. It's effectively a global environment, a global variable bucket. Easy to abuse, but also convenient for us to get some stuff between some screens. All right. Questions about the exam? I think, does everybody understand when they're going through the stuff what to focus on?
Yeah.
Turn your focus away from Android and towards the programming concepts. Okay? And really focus in on the things that, when I come to class and I say stuff like, oh, I've forgotten. What does the super keyword do? Or what does the this keyword do? There's a reason why I'm emphasizing those things. Stuff that I've said, oh, this is one of those top 5 concepts. These are important concepts. And hopefully something you've seen this last couple days is how we took concepts and we applied it to a very specific problem. But now that you understand how it gets applied to that problem, I promise you can apply it to all sorts of problems, whether it's in Android or it's in .NET or it's in Swift, doesn't matter. These are programming concepts. Make sense? Yeah. Questions, comments, concerns, bribes? All right, hopefully I will see everybody in here next semester for 300. If you're not registered for it, if you're an IT major, I don't care, it's not required. You take that class. It's an important class.
Coming back, do you remember Paul from last semester?
I know, I'm having him he'll be in your 300 class. Because I'm having him take 250 over Winterim.
Yeah. I'm trying to get into AI too, right away.
And the security class. Have him take 426.
I don't know if I'm in that class.
You should. If you are not enrolled in the security class 426, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. It's our new class for next semester. It's a cybersecurity class. It's going to be good.
Do you think that it's like, this is the time to take it, or will it be offered other semesters?
It will be offered other semesters. So if it's a deal breaker for your schedule, you don't have to take it. But I would really encourage you to take it. The numbers are a little low in the class, so it needs some people. But I really think that it's Dr. Wall is like kind of, yeah, he's gung-ho, he's excited about the class. Yeah, it's not a me class. This isn't a spring. But he's an expert in that stuff, and he's very motivated to do some cool stuff in that class. All right?
Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 10:05, right? Sounds right?
I don't want to, I don't know. I don't know if that sounds right or not, but ish.
I'm interested. I think cybersecurity would be that's something I think would be a fun,
Yeah.
fun area
There
to
are
work in.
spots available though, it sounds
Yeah.
like.
He is an expert at it, and now he's kind of been empowered to do what he really wants to do in that class. So I think it's going to be a good class.
Is that something that you think you'd have to major in order, like any sort of like cybersecurity, or do you think with a computer science degree you might be able to work